on the hardware end. Now let's deal with some software, right?
So I'm here with
Jason that's a stupid book.
Author of
that's a stupid book right there.
Well, are you an author of another book other than that one?
Oh no, I'm being facetious with myself because it's kind of like, you know, what I do and you know where I've been and things that I go through, you know, it's kind of like the way that I do it in my videos is I talk about belt levels. So like there's white belt levels, and then you progress up through the levels, right? Where I'm at now is in a totally different place than like what that is aimed at, and that's all different kind of belt levels there. I give all different kind of belt levels in that book, but you know, it goes back to like what is it, 1 Corinthians 13 or something like that, where it's, Paul's talking about when I was a child, I used to talk like a child, I used to think like a child, but then I put the ways of the child behind me. And whereas I used to see through a glass dimly, now I see clear. And so it's kind of like that in the sense of you can use these metaphors or these types or typologies or these myths or these, you know, topoi, and you can grab real things with those. You really can. But I see those as kind of like lower belt levels. You know what I mean? Like almost like a blue belt or something like that. You know, when we start talking about that level. So.
Well, one thing that's been a problem with me that I would not be a good teacher is that I guess part of it's because I have, you know, I was reading at a college level when I was like 6, 7 years old and, you know, accepted into a certain place, but they didn't want me bad enough to like actually pay for a supervisor, because under 16 you have to have some sort of supervision or something like that. But I don't understand the whole grade level in terms of math and stuff like this, because I was doing physics, you know, when I was 7 years old. So it's kind of, and I was, you know, I don't understand, for example, that people don't understand every word in the King James Version of the Bible or something like that, and Shakespeare and stuff like that, and a lot of stuff that people, you know, I don't know what people understand, so I just say what I'm going to say. But I understand the grade level and moving on sort of thing, because I myself write about I write a paper, I prepare even months for a ritual and stuff, and then I drop it off. I don't really continue practicing. It's out there, either written down or recorded or something, but it's like, you know, I just leave it and move on to the next thing. I do keep I do keep a lot of stuff going, but I mean, you know, a lot of stuff I just put out there, and then it's, I mean, I wish that some stuff was still there. I wrote a philosophy book based around over 60 philosophers, and it's gone because of computer problems.
Oh, on that point, let me ask you, who's your favorite philosopher or your favorite philosophical understanding?
My favorite philosopher, I don't know. It depends on the circumstance. In some circumstances, Nietzsche would be pretty good. Other circumstances, Aristotle. Other circumstances, you know, you kind of, you know, it's like you have certain groups of philosophers, like the pre-Socratics. You have, you know,
well, okay, let me narrow it down a little bit. I don't mean to cut you off or anything, because you said Nietzsche and then Aristotle, which is, like you said, so totally different.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on David Hume, for example?
David Hume, I know I have thoughts on it. Well, was Hume the one? No, it was Hobbes that had the behemoth and Leviathan thing.
Yeah, that was Hobbes. Hume was, you know, on the nature of human understanding, and he's a radical empiricist. He was the guy that gave the critique of causation, the radical critique of causation, where he basically said there's no such thing as cause and effect metaphysically, because all you ever see is the cause followed by the effect. You never see the act of causation itself. You know, radical empiricism, in other words. The guy that Kant was responding to, in essence.
Well, I don't exactly think we're blank slate, for example. I think there were.
Oh no, that was a different guy. That was a totally different guy. I think that was Locke, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was Locke. I could be wrong about that.
A lot of this stuff isn't quite on the surface, but I've you know, there's it's like you've heard the phrase used, a causal, and it's like you're not really talking about anything different than causal. It's just you're you're putting something different for pretty much the same type of thing, maybe on a different level, but
oh no, a causal has nothing to do with Hume.
No, I'm saying the there is you know, like the like some of the Greeks figured out that sight and hearing and stuff is not exactly the same. It's not completely independent of like the eyeballs or the ears or something. I mean, these are the organs which they happen through, but you know, so they had this idea of God as the one that sees in itself rather than seeing through an organ or indirectly or something, because you can knock someone upside the head and things appear all right with their eyes and everything, and you know, their sight's all messed up, or
oh, were you still going there? I don't know, man. Yeah, dude. I mean, the Greeks, I think a lot of the pre-Socratics, again, were super fucking awesome, but we don't really have a whole lot of their works, you know, as far as like their written works. We just know what, for example, mostly Aristotle had to say about them, you know, in critique, just kind of like we don't have a lot of what were, you know, commonly called the heresies of the original Christian church. We don't have a lot of their works. We just have to go by what Irenaeus said about them, for example, in his Against Heresies. So we have to reconstruct those a little bit, but yeah, I mean, Thales and Anaximander and fucking any Heraclitus, any of these guys, I mean, they had really deep thoughts. I totally agree with that, but we really can't reconstruct a lot of what they had to say. I mean, just bits and pieces of it, you know.
Like these people who try to reconstruct a historical Jesus, and you find there's at least 4 people that they base the guy off of.
100%.
100%. And then you can't really say that by the time there was the Catholic Church as a historical entity about 180 CE, that it was even the same thing as Pauline Christianity. There was some obvious changes that occurred at that point, but so even trying to
I actually think the most interesting facet of Christianity is pre-Pauline Christianity, which is almost impossible to reconstruct, but we do have evidences of it in Jesus and his 5 brothers. We have evidences of it in I forget the testimony of I forget what the hell it was. It's one of these. It was a thing where James was thrown off of the precipice. And there was this whole idea that Paul, the early persecutor of Christianity, basically eliminated what was essentially, it would be akin to Shiite Islam these days, where it was essentially a bloodline tradition. So Jesus and his brothers, that was a bloodline tradition, and it was supposed to be carried out that way.
Well, are you aware that they found predating the Paul and early on in the life of where the early on in the time period where they say Jesus was, around the first decade of BCE, I mean the first decade of the Common Era, you have you know, you have a character who wrote basically what the Book of Revelations without its per se what you'd call the Christian character of the Jesus to be worshipped. It's basically the same text with you know, with a few things a bit different. In Aramaic, they have you know, they have a manuscript, they have dated, and then you have some documents among the Essenes for an even earlier couple characters among them that appear to be what they call the historical Jesus, but again, it's not one person when you look into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things there. I mean, I know that there's some guys like even Raymond Brown, who's like he was one of these really big Catholic biblical critics. He dated Revelations extremely early. I mean, the Apocalypse of John, whatever you want to call it, the last book of the New Testament, whatever you want to call it. He dated it extremely early. And some scholars reject it outright. So I wasn't aware that there was an Aramaic version of that. As a matter of fact, I'm not aware that there's an Aramaic version of anything. As a fact, I think that the
There's a book about Bacchus that I think there's an Aramaic. I think the earlier versions, of course, are Greek, but I think there are Aramaic versions that predate anything that we would call a Jesus. They're about 4 centuries before, the 90s, when the Gospel of John was written in its earliest fragments. We have a text about Bacchus that actually looks pretty much like what you see later, except instead of Bacchus, it's Jesus,
Oh, I'm totally unaware of that. You should send me some links to that, because I'm not aware of any. As far as I know, as far as I'm aware, the what do you call it, Dead Sea Scrolls, they're all Hebrew as far as I'm aware. And maybe there are bits and pieces that are in Aramaic, but
what I mean by Aramaic is basically the language of outside of Persia.
It's a patois of Hebrew. Yeah, it's basically a patois of Hebrew.
What they call Hebrew in terms of the Middle Ages on, it may be falling along the same script tradition, but it's kind of narrowed down to one tribe instead of all the tribes in the area speaking it. And there's certain differences in grammar and word usage that kind of even twist things on its head. It's like there's this interesting passage in Tonic that if you read it in Hebrew, it's about destroying the temple and a bunch of gibberish, basically. But if you read it in the old language, it's something different. And of course, some of the changes were because they did this thing where they abbreviated names. And it's like, what Besht means in the language of their scripture? Baal Shem Tov. They're basically calling the guy shameful. That's what it meant in that language, but I don't think in Hebrew it means something that bad.
Well, yeah, these are languages that operate a little bit differently than our own, in the sense that they're all root languages, in the sense that, like, you have like a series of consonants, it's 2 or 3 separated by non-voweled vowels, so you can vowel them in a number of ways, so you can get a lot of different meanings out of just that simple set of 2 or 3 consonants. That's kind of a recurring theme within both Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic.
Well, and all those Semitic languages you can kind of tie back to. Well, I mean, you can tie some of it back to Egypt, some of it back to the Persians, and some of it back to Arabic in particular. You had to wait for those dams to break, and the culture from the Abyssinian culture to make its way up, because it was no longer this dominant culture. People had to leave because it wasn't this breadbasket of North Africa anymore. So they kind of spread out. That was necessary to create Arabic as a language, basically. But they all kind of had this basis where each letter kind of does something to the, almost like a hieroglyphic sort of language, that each letter kind of does something to the meaning of the term, which is interesting. So you can kind of, based on that, reconstruct some of what's missing in terms of, like, if you take Tonic, you have a quarter of the words. They don't kind of, there's not a living meaning of a quarter of the words in that book.
Well, you say Tanakh, you basically mean the first 5 books of the Bible, right? That's what you're talking about?
I mean, Torah, Nebiim, Ketubim.
Okay, so the entire Old Testament.
The entire of those 24 books, you have around a quarter of the words. The linguistic scholars don't agree on a living meaning of the term. You can say semantics and stuff like that, but you can't say, I mean, particularly some of the older material that ended up in Genesis and stuff, you kind of, it's like there's something in the ark and they don't know what it is.
Well, that's a can of worms, Genesis, man, because, I know the entire, linguistic origins of that, insofar as there's like basically 4 authors. It's the JEPD hypothesis. So that's why you have
it goes beyond that, but I am aware that, I was talking to somebody about, basically he was saying the idea, as far as it is translated correctly, sort of a cop-out. And like, what else are you supposed to do if to say maybe there was some truth at the start there, but I don't know about now, because it's been, the Bible's been translated so many times, rendered into different versions, grafted together out of different cultures. Like Genesis in particular was grafted out of a whole series of cultures. You don't even know how many cultures it came from. So I mean,
Well,
what?
there's a lot of Babylonian mythos in there, of course.
Of course, most things that are valuable in mythology kind of continue on in one form. That's part of what I mean by structures of consciousness. I don't necessarily say that, like, you know, as you sort of saw, I was doing my own faux Ekankar springtime ceremony seminar on my channel, and you know, they project all these wisdom temples that a former Scientology member wrote down, and he drew as many characters as he could think up, and that's what people visualize. But there's real structures of consciousness that you operate on with all that. I mean, it's kind of weird having their rainbow break down the way it is, because that's not how a rainbow is colored. But
oh well, yeah, actually, if you get into like even the Tibetan Buddhist teachings on color are all fucked up. I mean, if we really want to get deep into it, but you know, I really like in Ekankar, I like that who chant, you know what I mean? Like the who, like that vibration. I think that's really cool, man. But you know, like I was telling you in that thing that I said on your video, you know, it was just a girl that I was really into in high school, and she was really into that shit. And then she turned me on to Zachariah Sitchin, and I got all into that shit. And I was like, wow, this is fucking fascinating as fuck. You know what I'm saying? Then it starts breaking you down past, you know, just the traditional ways of understanding. Then you start getting into theosophy and stuff like that. You start getting into like the occult then, you know, and you start getting into Crowley, and you start really breaking it down, but then you break it down and build it up, and you can understand that we're ultimately dealing with one simple thing, which is just the nature of mind, just the nature of the way we perceive the world, the way in which we categorize the world. And then you can start, as you're saying, see the similarities, see the same structures, and see them slightly different here, slightly different there. But still, at the end of the day, we're dealing with one simple thing, you know?
well, it was back in the 80s. You know, um, I was noticing contradictions and other issues with the Bible, and you know, I went to the right parent apparently, you know, because I went to my father, and I was like, well, one of these days I'm going to go fix the thing, and I'm not quite thinking of it in that terms, but I mean, and then I ended up watching the Joseph Campbell stuff, and later in life I basically read everything by the guy that I could get a hold on. Some of his books ended up rare and not really able to find, or at least not at the price where I.
Let me interject really quick. You talk about Joseph Campbell. I think he's boring as fuck. Have you ever read Mircea Eliade?
Shamanism Techniques of Ecstasy was particularly influential to me, because I sort of realizing that, ended up thinking to myself, wait a second, all these experiences, I mean, I can't, not necessarily that I can turn myself into the next prophet of the world, basically, but all these sort of mystical experiences, you can really have them if you have, you know, the techniques. And I have studied brain, neural pathways and where chemicals are released in the body and stuff to try to have experiences that I can't share with most people, because you're like, you know, you're sitting in your temple room or in the forest or something, and you're like, you're telling later this experience of how the chair is inanimate, but you really do, you feel like, you know, the carpet loves you and the chair loves you. You feel like these things love you, and you feel like, you know, and you end up feeling, you know, every single day practically. I feel like when I had surgery in the hospital, and you know, they give you some pretty good medications sometimes, or well, some of the side effects I don't like too much, but I don't remember any side effects with the you know, with the hydromorphone. And you know, it's like, and then you're out, and but you're not out, you're conscious. So once you have the technique down, and maybe sometimes at first, because I've hung out with different Sufi orders, the Mevlevis, the Shadaliya, mostly the Chisti, some of the stuff where they end up holding, you know, because particularly if you're not used to it, you're gonna, you know, you're gonna, like a jolt, you're gonna collapse. just like you've been shot up with some drug or something, and they've given you a little bit more than you need, right? But you can have experiences like, basically, you look them up. Some experiences I look them up, I try to figure out what's going on here, and WebMD or something ends up telling me which drug I'm overdosing on, basically, and I'm like, okay. But it's totally safe. If even if you have heart problems, the ephedrine release is no longer some super dangerous thing. Maybe you can't. There's certain techniques I can't handle too well, like like overheating and hyperventilating like crazy, that sort of thing. There's certain stuff like that I've tried that it's like, that appears like it's a danger to me. I kind of had an experience. It was like the air was killing me. Of course, I lived in a moldy apartment at one point, so it was not as bad as that, but it was sort of, I really felt like I was dying because I slowed down my breath to the point where, I was only breathing like once every 2 minutes and something. And it was very intense for about a second, but then it was like, it felt like it was killing me. I kind of came back, but I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get myself going again. It was like, so I'm not bringing the breath control to that extreme anymore, but.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was more thinking of the history of religious ideas. But yeah, shamanism, archaic techniques of ecstasy or whatever.
Did he write the Sacred and the Profane?
Huh?
Did he write the Sacred and the Profane?
He might have. I'm not sure. I only own like the book that you mentioned. I have it's like about, oh, what the fuck? It's like that thick. It's a black bound, the one that I have, Shamanism. I found that extremely dry. He's mostly talking about the Eastern European cultures, and he's talking about like the methods of the idea of shamanism was that it was somebody that was basically, and this gets back to like a lot of the cave paintings that you see, and this is brought up in a book by Graham Hancock called The Supernatural, where you see these pictures of these people that are pierced. And so basically the idea is that these are wounded individuals somehow. They're somehow weak or fallible physically, but then they become foci of the culture spiritually. So it's like, by their being physically weak or somehow, what you might call cast out or something like that, they're cast out, but then at the point that they're cast out, they become that spiritual foci and that bridge between the supernatural and the natural. So that's what I got out of the shamanism book. But I was more talking about him from the standpoint of the history of religious ideas, because I find that to be a much better exposition. It's 3 volumes. I find that to be a much better exposition of the mythic structure than Campbell, which is what you were talking about. You were talking about Joseph Campbell, and I find Joseph Campbell to be extremely unbearable to read. I just do. I prefer Eliade.
My bigger complaint about Campbell is the all is the same. He kind of goes too far. He kind of goes too far with that, and he blames one group, and there is some blaming groups that aren't even involved in that sort of belief or practice because it occurs in some other group like it or something. That sometimes occurs with them, but mainly it's this all the same, and there is differences in terms of beliefs and practices and what they do and that sort of thing. I mean, seeing that most paths are mostly the same, that was certainly important, and that kind of got me into it. But he's kind of too indifferent with some matters, I think.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Because Eliade,
Hancock's definitely a more interesting person, and even though he's like less, and obviously able to reach more people with the sort of way that he has to.
He was on Joe Rogan yesterday, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to watch. He was on Joe Rogan yesterday. That's on my watch later list.
In that 3, 4, 5 triangle thing, it's using that as using that incline as a method was kind of something I didn't know, and certain things about certain things that he talked about, I can't remember anything particular. I definitely did learn some things from him, but there's some stuff. It's like you have to get past some stuff. It's like with certain techniques, that weird feeling in your nose or your ears or something that you have, or something that you got to get past, and then you have the experience. But you can get past. It's a lot easier nowadays because it's the information's available. It's like it's not something, oh no, I got to stop, because most people would have figured, oh no, I got to stop. And it's like, no, just wait 5 more seconds and you're going to, you're going to be, like the Stargate, that Stargate movie is actually based on a type of mysticism, that sort of thing. I think it is, because there is an ancient sort of Egyptian mysticism that kind of, it works like that, but better. You literally go screeching through some colorful thing. You figure out where this star is in the sky, and you kind of direct yourself towards that one star. And it really helps when you have a shaft and a pyramid or something. But if you follow those couple instructions, I didn't even think it was going to be, but there's cave paintings. If you look at it, some experiences, once you have them, you realize, all these acupuncture points. Once you feel that warmth pouring out those parts, or once you have the vision of that part of your brain for some reason, and then you look it up and it's like, oh, it's that part of the brain, and I guess it makes sense that it would come out, visually. But when you have the experience, you understand the painting. But there is the sociological role. You say the wounded or the weak person, everybody has their advantage in society. Like me, I lay down more than most people because of my condition, and obviously that would give me more time to think than a lot of people, and more time to, I guess, relax and go over things, and maybe I can help people in ways that, but it's not terribly appreciated nowadays. I guess I'm a lot more appreciated than I used to because of YouTube and stuff, but.
Well, no, actually, I was just referring that back to Eliade's work on shamanism, that book that you mentioned, because that was when I mentioned Eliade, that was the first one you brought up, and I was just mentioning that was his analysis of these cultures and basically Eastern Europe, Russia, essentially. That's where his analysis of shamanism was centered. It wasn't really centered in, for example, Central America or South America or anything like that. His focus was kind of very, very laser focused, but within certain tribes, etc. And the concept was always the same. It was always the idea that the shaman was somebody that was physically wounded or weak in a physical sense, but then that physicality of weakness created a spiritual strength, and that was the ultimate nature of the shaman. So I mean, that's his analysis. I'm not saying that that's mine or anything like that, you know what I mean? But I defer to him on that, because he's
the findings regarding that it's not always, you don't always have to get so sick you practically die, or get really injured, get torn apart by a wild beast but survive, and then you're kind of the guy.
Well, it's the idea of the shaman is the mediator to the spiritual. So it's like you have to be at death's door in a sense, in order to mediate that back to the culture, to mediate that back to the tribe or the people. I think that was his analysis, and I defer to him because I'm no expert on that entire meditative state, or like you appear to be far more familiar with it on a personal level. Because like we all have different doors we walk through, and that's just not my door.
Well, there was a few times where I almost died on medication, or very well could have died, and it wasn't like, there wasn't really anything to bring back of value. I think I had from the experiences, as sort of a side note. Same thing. All those days living in that horrible place where I didn't know whether I was going to get up after 20 minutes or whether I was just not going to breathe anymore. And I set a record. The major hospital of within 100 miles or something, they never saw anybody with so much mold in their blood. But I didn't get anything terribly valuable. Although I did have a couple experiences that kind of relate to the alien thing, because it's like a couple of those, I don't really interpret it as aliens, but a couple of those times it was like there was something with me. I had, couldn't breathe, couldn't move, and there was this. Well, I guess I could breathe, but didn't notice I could breathe. The gray sort of thing. And I guess the one time it was like it was like a giant. It was like Buddha size, like 9 feet tall, that sort of thing. But I don't really think I had anything that you know, that came back to me. I mean, that I could bring back in terms of a shaman that from that experience, other than the fact that I sort of, had I died in the experiences later on with the mildew issues instead of the medication issues, I would have died per se following spiritual practices. And I guess that's why that came, that's part of why that would have came out better. There was a show years ago, The Nightmares or something like that.
I'm not familiar.
There was this big famous documentary or something like this where they basically showed that the people who, they didn't know what it was and thought it was horrible and started instantly fighting it, but the people who kind of gave it a chance, typically it was, you know, it was not too bad. And that's kind of how some of these experiences play out, is that if you fight it, like all these people that act like anything that's not explicitly Christian, it must be horribly evil and all this stuff, no matter how pleasant it is and all this other stuff. And or even something that's not part of their church in particular. I mean, there was a psychologist that lived in that had an office a few miles from me that was a member of a particular church, and his missionaries would hang out, or the missionaries of his church knew what was going on, I guess, and would sometimes pick up members, people to join that church based on, because if you were a member of that church, certain experiences were acceptable, but if you weren't, he'd label you as having a mental illness. And I mean, to take it to the extreme, like this guy, the guy who calls himself Stephen Christ, I respect his religious freedom. If he tried to overturn the country, don't put him in a mental hospital. Say whatever. We can't say anything about you saying you're the Christ. We can say you tried to overturn the country and have made death threats, and we're going to deal with that directly instead of, you know, treating you like that. But a lot of what happened, a lot of psychologists abuse their power and basically say that you have a different religion than me, so therefore you're insane. And, you know, I don't agree with that sort of. I've rambled off on a point and I don't know where I started.
Well, let me say this. We have in our brain, we have these receptors, and neurotransmitters unlock those receptors, but we all have those receptors. And so, like, we're capable of experiencing almost any state of mind naturally. We can naturally trip. Some people are born with a certain chemical, what might be called an imbalance, but that's just because we judge that over and against what most people consider to be a balance. As you're saying, essentially, is that there are certain people that,
what happens with women a lot is that, you know, some women are moodier than others and somehow that makes them ill. And I'm like, no, we all have women like that in our family. We shouldn't all try to drug them down.
but I don't know where the women thing came off of, dude.
Well, that's what I see the most is I said there's a lot higher incident of women being labeled with emotional or psychiatric conditions, that a lot of times it just seems that it's like, well, they may not be like everybody, but there's always someone like that. And I wouldn't necessarily say that them being a little more moody or something's cause to drug them or call them ill or something. But I see a lot of that happen. Is my point. I see it more directed towards women than men. Of course, I think women are also more likely to ask for help than men. So,
dude, I have no idea where the woman thing. I mean, I don't get that. I don't get that at all. I don't know what that's even about. You know, I did hear. Oh, wait. I get it. Hysterical, right? That's where the word hysterical comes from, right? Now I see where. But I don't really think that way at all. You know, I think men and women, and men are more likely to be, you know, outwardly violent, whereas women are more likely to be a little bit more subtle with their violence, because they're not going to punch you, but they'll be psychological about it, more passive aggressive, if you will, which sometimes can be a little bit more dangerous. especially if you're in a culture that eschews violence towards women, which every culture should, because women are physically weaker than men. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I don't see any kind of like natural inclination towards mental frailty amongst women. I just don't. I think.
Well, I wasn't saying that there's. I mean, in an overall sense, I don't think that either mentally or physically. I mean, there's certain strengths and weaknesses that both have, yeah, over the other on average. But I don't think there's any inequality. I don't. That's not what I was saying. But I was saying that the natural differences people are labeling as illness, and it's sort of more directed towards that. And then I guess there's disadvantages that society has given to men too. But I might as well start with one of my usual questions. So what do you think is the purpose of life?
Life. I think life is its own purpose. I don't think there's any ultimate higher purpose. Was that like that?
What?
That must have. I know. I mean, you're probably like, "Whoa, that's a non-answer, really." But I don't see that there is a purpose to life other than life itself. I think life is its own purpose.
Well, a lot of you know, a lot of what I'm going to ask people, you know, if I get to it, people don't have an answer to the purpose. What's the purpose of life? That's, you know, you you know. Try going to some big old church and try asking the leader that question. He probably won't have a coherent answer if he has an answer at all. And that's just sort of how it is.
Well, no, actually, I think most preachers would say the purpose of life is to accept Jesus Christ and be born again or some shit like that. I'm just saying is that I don't think that I think life does have a purpose, but that purpose is life itself. I don't think there's anything additional to that answer. You know, it's like there's no other purpose than the living of life itself. Life is its own purpose, in other words.
Okay, so what do you think? Do you think there's any sort of mystical occurrence before life that continues into this life? Oh,
you mean like prior lives? You mean like reincarnation, that kind of thing?
If that's how it inflects in your personal beliefs, yes.
No, I don't.
So what about afterlife? You don't.
Okay, to answer those questions, really what I have to do is I have to just set up what's called a B theory of time. A B theory of time is basically like past, present, and future all exist within a four-dimensional matrix without time. So past, present, future all exist simultaneously outside of time. It's not outside of time. Time is a feature of that. So like we perceive things to be either in our past or in our future, but those things are simultaneously existing. So to say, did this life exist before that life, etc., has no meaning on the ultimate scale. So what I prefer, I don't prefer reincarnation as a term. What I use is a word called meta-incarnation. What that basically means is that each and every sentient being, a sentient being would be like a locus of consciousness, is connected to each and every other sentient being in an infinite number of ways, although we can't perceive those. Sometimes we might be able to perceive one. So if we perceive one and that one is prior to us in our own understanding, then that would be what we call reincarnation. So like I could think I was reincarnated this, that, or the other guy, whatever. That's just a way of the consciousness to localize that. It's basically like a 4D understanding of time, a 4D understanding of consciousness within a 3D matrix. So you can perceive it that way. You can think that you were this person before, and then your afterlife would be this person after. But I'm saying in the ultimate scheme of things, there is no before and there is no after. There's only simultaneous existence on the meta level, in other words. So.
Well, one sort of value to both Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche is the idea of living life on its own terms, as if that's, you know, as if that's it. And of course, Nietzsche also talked this idea as well, live it like you're going to live it the same way forever, you know.
Okay.
His eternal recurrence thing. So, okay, motivation-wise, when you do the right thing, or is it more likely to be out of love of doing good, or pleasing some entity, personal enjoyment or pleasure, hope, fear, hate for either doing it or well, hate for doing something different, or hate for maybe the people who are doing something different, or I don't. I guess that's how I'll phrase it with you. But yeah.
Well, that's kind of a weird question. You're asking about the motivation of action?
Yeah, love, hate, fear, fear, hope, and something else maybe.
Well, I'm going to have to say I almost think that's a nonsensical question. What makes me act in any one instance may not be the same that makes me act in another instance. So I could act out of love or hate or hope or fear or any number of those or none of those. That's the nature of karma, actually. Karma just means literally action. So action begets action. It's like a chain of events. So how do you parse that out or tease that out? I mean, it kind of really just depends on the action itself, or the literal act itself. It's not one thing, in other words. So I don't.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people I have found, because I've given hundreds of these interviews, but I mean, they haven't ended up on my channel. They've been like in person, that sort of thing. And a lot of people, I think it takes at least all four to get a balance going, because it's one point you're going to need, every single one. It's at some point or another. So, but some people are going to say, oh no, the hate and fear, I'm going to leave that alone, or I'm going to leave alone this. And it's like, I don't really care about the love. And
I think what I'm saying is, I think you're being a little bit too categorical with it, in the sense of, like, you're saying that there's these four things. I don't think you can even like categorize it into those categories. It goes much deeper than that. You can have mixtures. Even if you only accept those four things that you were talking about, you can have mixtures of those, and those, like if you had 60% this and 30% that and 10% that, that's another thing in and of itself. So what I'm saying is, it's far too complex to tease out. It's basically each individual action has a unique relationship within that structure of action or karma. I don't think you can tease it out into any kind of categories like that. I just think it's far too complicated. Even any simple action, even. I mean, you can try, and it might make sense to you to categorize things that way. Just to me, it seems like that's a vast oversimplification. But that's just me.
Yeah. Well, I fully understand that, but particularly the most likely, then people tend to get, people tend to give an answer, in my experience from asking it. But walking around Portland, Oregon or something is different than some places too, I guess. So I'm
not most people, bro.
Well, yeah, everybody's different. Everybody's different somehow. It's so how much time do you think could be devoted to spiritual or religious practice on a daily basis?
100%.
And of course, that would answer the next one in terms of a daily matter. But oh wait, I asked daily. So that obviously weekly. What things do you think that you personally couldn't do as part of that?
You got to be a little bit more helpful with that question.
Well,
let's say let's just say for instance that I don't see a difference between the spiritual and the material. So for example, let's say I think that every action that you do materially is also a spiritual action, because I don't see that those two, I see Advaita. In other words, there is no difference. It's non-dual. So everything that I do is acting in accordance with Buddha nature. So it's not being religious. I don't have to do a devotion or an action or a ritual or anything. That's blue belt. Once you get to black belt, you understand that there is nothing that you can do that departs from Dharmakaya. Everything that you do, by its very definition, is Advaita. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a weird answer, I know, and you're not going to get it a lot. But then again, there's not too many black belts walking around. So,
well, some stuff I could, people could say categorically, it's like, but it's like that. It's like the whole killing thing. It's like you say, well, okay, well, then what about your dinner table? Or maybe there's some, it's like there's a difference between self-defense and just, I want your stuff. So,
actually, in the ultimate teachings, and this is what's kind of, most people don't recognize this, there is no moral judgment in the ultimate teachings. Even a serial killer, serial rapist, child rapist, there is no moral judgment given to these, because these are just states of mind that exist within what I call the meta incarnation, or just the samsara of individuals that persist within the world. Now we, within that world, can make judgments, and we can say, well, this guy is a really bad guy and we want to kill that motherfucker. If anybody ever raped my daughter or even my fucking son, I'd happily go to prison for the rest of my life for killing that motherfucker. But I understand on a deeper level that there is no ultimate moral judgment. There is no judge. There is no God it's a sin or anything like that. This is all our own mental state, which is samsara. I know that sounds like I want to have my cake and eat it too, but yeah, that's kind of where we are.
There's things that I've, I've used the word criminal and perverted recently. It's like certainly things that I would have had the opportunity of that I wouldn't have personally judged wrong, but the consequences thereof would have not been quite so, I could accomplish more, for example, had I not gone down, I've accomplished more, I think, because I didn't go down certain routes. Because I think if a lot of us think back, for example, we probably did have the opportunity to kill somebody, even somebody that deserved it. It's like, you gave an example. It's like, we all know, most of us know of such a character in society and possibly where to find them. Some of us have even had some of these people admit to our face these sorts of things that they've done, and you kind of, you thought, okay, I don't want to go to prison for 25 years for taking this guy out, but you don't think that it's wrong to,
Well, it kind of gets back to free will. And the idea behind free will is basically, and I'm with Sam Harris on this, I believe free will is an illusion. I don't believe we actually have free will. But the thing is, we all act as if we did. And that's kind of the difference in what I'm talking about here. So if I say that there is no moral judgment from on high, or there is no ultimate adjudication, that's basically the same as saying that there is no ultimate free will. However, it's kind of like space, time, and all these other things. They're all illusions, but yet they're all like, we accept them as like grabbing us, like we're bound within this sphere that is like a limitation of Dharmakaya, or a limitation of the ultimate. So yeah, I mean, like I say, I'd be more than happy to kill somebody that fucked with my family. I mean, I'd be more than happy to do that. Now, somebody that fucked with a stranger, and certainly I've known people, like you say, that have done a lot of bad things. Matter of fact, a lot of people that I would consider my homeboys, have done a lot of cruddy shit. Not to me, though, so it's like, I even knew a dude, and this is no fucking lie. I knew a dude that was prostituting, basically human trafficking, young girls. And one of those happened to be somebody that I knew. But he was my homeboy. So, I don't know. How do I judge that? That's a hard thing to say, man. I mean, if that was my daughter that he did that to, he'd be a dead man. But I don't know, man. It's complicated. how we run upon these things, because again, we're a part of that. We're within that understanding rather than, you know, being able to step outside of it. So I mean, we can theoretically step outside of it, or even meditatively step outside of it, if we can reach some sort of, you know, state of samadhi, you know, where we can kind of step outside of our, you know, samsaric existence and reach, you know, that fundamental level. But we only ever do it for a second or two at a time. I mean, the people that can really hold that state of mind and hold it perpetually, they're usually monks and shit like that. People that kind of have to really cut themselves off from the what's known as the chain of samsara, which is essentially the wheel turning and everything having, you know, karmic relation to everything else.
Well, I certainly see the idea, you know, this free will makes it sound like we can do anything, and I know we can't do anything, and you know, I would agree with that in the way that, you know, if I like to think of it in terms of a limited will, but we don't usually know what our limits are. And you know, the point of thelema to me was basically, you know, you're trying to break free from the externally imposed, as well as, you know, what you've just flat up invented that's maybe not, you know, the case either, limits and such upon yourself to find out, you know, what the reality behind it all is. But I don't know what point.
Well, within Buddhism, there's a concept of what's known as the rainbow body. And the rainbow body, and it sounds really silly when you hear it, but the basic idea behind it is that if you were ever to achieve this state, that your body would literally dissolve into like light. And the idea behind this is that you can't, because of karma, because of action, because you are kind of stuck within this wheel of action. So you can't really escape that. The only thing you can do is understand it, understand the limitations, and you act accordingly. So all of these things, though they are illusions, and if we ever were to be able to dissolve them, we would ultimately dissolve, which is the nature of the body within, you know, what are called kayas within Buddhism, is that these things would dissolve because they are ultimately limitations or spatial kind of like situations that we find ourselves within. So so I, you know, like free will is an illusion, I would say, but it's a convenient illusion because we all act as though it is real, and so then it becomes real samsarically within the reality that we perceive. So, you know.
So if you had one of these experiences where your mind and your body, your that sort of thing is, it's like a vehicle, and that's not really you, but that's like the vehicle you're operating.
I could either say never or all the time. I think those are kind of the same. You know, I guess you're saying, do I feel different from my body? Like there's a me that is not my body? Is that what you mean?
Like, yeah, have you not just thought, well, I'm something eternal, but you've but actually experienced yourself as like, you know, the operator of the body rather than the body itself, sort of thing, you know, as more than a mechanical being per se, or.
So like my body would be the car and I would be the driver. Is that what you mean? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh yeah, all the time then. Yeah, I guess. I don't want to try to, like, I'm not trying to dance around your questions, but I think that they're worded in a certain kind of way that in some ways doesn't really fit my metaphysic ultimately. I mean, every time I close my eyes or I go to sleep or I dream or I meditate or anything like that, then I can lose say attachment to my physical body. But does that mean that I'm perceiving that I'm somehow different from I'm just not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about it that way. So that would require me to somehow vector things in a certain way that I don't think I vector them, if that makes any fucking sense at all. I think
I'm not saying that, yeah, you know, I mean, you can shift away from being, you know, focused on the awareness of such, but it's obvious that, you know, people talk about, you know, shutting off the body and leaving the body and shutting off the mind and getting past your mind. And it's like, no, you're using your mind. And
it's almost like asking the question, is water wet? Because once you try to answer that question, then you start parsing yourself into silliness, in my opinion. I just think in Buddhism, the nature of the idea of a kaya, which is a body, is essential. It's essential no matter what level you're at. Even at the ultimate level, it's dharmakaya. Even, you know, you get into nirmanakaya, you get into just your own particular kaya, which is your body or my body or whatever, your particular body. There's always going to be an embodiment, because there has to be. I don't think there's any way to disembody particularly. It's just, you know, where's your focus? Where's your mind?
So you've mentioned dreams. What sort of dreams? Stuff you'd consider prophetic? Stuff you'd consider?
Oh no, nothing like that. So no, I think a dream is basically, and this is going to sound really silly, but it's like you're defragmenting your hard drive. Is basically what a dream is.
Well, there's the teaching of the 3 types of dreams, and one of those is basically it's the sayings of yourself, and basically that's what modern psychology focuses on, is that here's what happens in your waking life, and it reprocesses itself in your sleep, and it turns out that's sort of what dreams do. And I think that's a lot of what people, if you've experienced deja vu, my personal theory on that is that because your brain's thinking about stuff when you sleep, deja vu is just that you've thought that that's a possibility before, and you're clicking like you've had that experience, and you know, but you're not quite remembering it.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never had deja vu, not even once in my whole life, man. I never have.
I've talked. I don't know if I use the art of projection and that sort of thing, because you can literally not just the little. Have you had a lucid dream?
I mean, depends on what you mean by that, but yeah, I'll say yeah. Sure.
Okay, well, let's define it. Some people would say it's just you.
It's a dream where you're actually dreaming, but you're still in the dream.
But some people would say it's not a lucid dream unless you're like, controlling it, that sort of thing.
Okay, are we going to talk about, like, is this a gateway to astral projection? Because I've always heard these kind of things. Like, you can teach yourself to do all kind of weird tricks with your brain, and like, I mean, you could say daydreaming would be a lucid dream then at that point, because you're surely as hell controlling a daydream. Like, if you have a fantasy or something like that, you just fucking put yourself in a state of mind, and you're like, okay, I'm doing this now and I'm doing that, but you have your eyes closed and you can see everything clearly and everything like that. But are you really dreaming? Do you have to be in REM sleep to be doing this? Or, I mean, this is categories. I mean, I don't know what you mean. It's all states of mind.
Well, I certainly, well, I again don't, I don't feel like worshiping some random guy who comes up and says he's an ascended master and that sort of thing, like countless groups do. But well, not countless groups, but too many to figure out. That they actually try to get they get you to practice picturing them and picturing them doing stuff and all this stuff, and when you finally dream about them, you're supposed to thank them. And I'm like, yeah, that's this, the daydreaming and fantasizing. It's like, imagine going up to some woman and thanking her for your fantasy. It's like, typically wouldn't go over too well, I don't think. Although it could go over well.
Speak for yourself, bro. That's funny as shit you said that.
But Have you had what you'd call a near-death experience? I think I already had this.
Nope.
Have you encountered some sort of metaphysical being in your meditations and such?
Yeah, he's sitting right there behind me. You see him?
I guess that's
he's kind of creepy. Take that ice cream out of here, man. Yeah, that's my son. You didn't even close the door, bro. No, ask the question. Have I ever encountered a metaphysical being? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Have you ever had consciousness of encountering some sort of spirit or something else that wasn't, you know, incarnate in a physical body?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Did they manifest something visual or something other than them, or a voice, or what sort of thing went down?
Well, those are. Oh, I left that on. Yeah. You can change it. You can put your game on if you want. I'm doing an interview, man. So this gets back to a lot of my early occult dealings, where I would do a lot of visualizations. I would do a lot of ceremonial work, etc., to where you're actually bringing these might be called entities, although, you know, it depends on how you really consider things to be. So is it external or internal? You know, that's one of the big debates within the magical community is, you know, like, for example, take the goetic spirits. Are they external or internal? You know, that's a raging fucking debate. And I think the answer is both and. I don't think it's either or. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can touch with our minds. And it's all us, because like I say, when I go back to my idea of meta-incarnation, but then it's also not all us. Like, you're not me, for example. You are different from me. But at the fundamental level, we're identical. We kind of draw a line that makes us different. So when I was, you know, involved in lower belt level practices, I did a lot of shit where I would quote unquote summon demons and this, that, and the other, you know, but I kind of left that behind. So a lot of that was in my early workings that I did. I did a lot of the fucking, like, the, you know, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagrams and all the Golden Dawn techniques and the, you know, the four corners and all that bullshit, you know. And yeah, you get that sense that you are literally, when you vibrate the name of the archangels, you get that literal sense that you can literally see Gabriel on your right, and you can literally see Uriel on your left, or whatever. It's been so long, I can't remember, but you know how it works. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to train your mind to bring these things to mind. So are they separate from us? Or are they us, you know? Was that a way of not answering your question while also answering it?
So that's your goal here, to completely be unique as the one that doesn't answer the things.
No, I'm trying to, but what I'm saying is that I think that you have a certain set of categories that your questions kind of require. And what I'm saying is that maybe I don't buy those categories, or maybe I think that if you get far enough, that you'll begin to see that they kind of melt away a little bit, that they kind of, this is what nirvana means. Nirvana means extinguishing. So we extinguish that. We kind of like blow it out. That's the ultimate goal, is to reach that level. So like the lower levels, sure. Samsarically, sure.
Well, I'm certainly not saying that different types of experiences aren't blurring. It's like, yes, a lot of these can have all at once, past life memory, inner guides, voices inside, voices outside, you know, a relationship with something, a miracle, connections, you know, intuition, encountering something like it's dead. You know, it's occasionally a person will have, you know, I'll have a dream, or maybe like maybe it won't be a dream. Maybe I'll be awake, and it's like, you know, have you ever had one of those experiences that's like it's really brief in comparison to what you come back remembering something like days or even sometimes, and it's like, how in the world that happened in 5 minutes, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
Experiences you go through this whole list of things, and it's like,
well, to get to your thing about, like, I went through this period, and this was when I was first starting out in the occult, where I was seriously summoning banshee spirits, and I would literally summon them outside of my house in the bushes, and they were real, and I could hear the screeches and the screams. And even my friend, who I was trying to kind of guide, my best friend actually, who passed away, his name was Greg, was trying to guide him in that, and he even heard the noise one time. Now, is that a thing, or did I suggest it to him and he heard it in retrospect? You understand what I mean? So it's like, how do you really vector these things once you get beyond that? You look like you're bored as fuck, dude. Look at you.
No,
You look like you're bored as fuck, bro.
I haven't slept well the past few days, and I guess, hey, I'm not okay. No, I'm not completely stopped with the shaking, but I'm better than I have been for the past couple days. So it's, I'm
this is normally the time of day when I'm asleep too. So,
well, no, it's, I've overworked myself trying to make sure things are done before I'm not able to do them. So I've, you know, compacted things into too few days, but I thought I might only have a couple weeks to get all the gardening and stuff done. But so that's what I've been doing. So, yeah.
What do you mean by that?
It's not as easy for me as other people. I've mentioned I'm disabled, so I hurt a lot, like every day, and trying to throw in gardening on top of that, even if I break it into sections, I can kind of do. I've done too long of stretches of being out there with the hoe and stuff. So that's. So
you gotta
what?
You gotta pimp them hoes, man. You seriously gotta pimp them hoes. Come on, bro, laugh, man. Pimp them hoes. It's a joke.
Yeah, obviously I get the joke. Well, I understand. So in short, to make it clear to people who might not understand, what exactly would you mean by your title there, postmodern?
Oh, it says it in the very beginning of the book. Is basically modern Satanism is the Satanism of Anton LaVey, which is distinct from medieval Satanism, which is literally reverse Christianity, or, you know, you accept Christianity, but, you know, you worship the devil, who's the bad guy of Christianity. And Anton LaVey took that and said, no, we mean something different by that. And what I did was I said, no, we mean something even different by that. So if you want to know what my understanding of Satan is obviously the adversarial current of the world, just the nature of the world itself. I think the world is satanic by definition, through and through. Just the nature of the wheel. It keeps turning. We all die. It's dog eat dog. You know, every man for himself kind of thing. Although even though I'm a progressive, and I believe we can overcome it, it's still the nature of the world. It's the nature of the beast. So.
Well, obviously the idea of, you know, every path, whether it admits it or not, has some adversarial side to it. They try to say, oh no, you know, which has led to a lot of, you know, the way some people talk. It's like, depending on which group you are, it's like, well, that's the God and that's the Satan and that's the God, you know, and then there's the phrase that you're either referring to Satan as the good one or God as the good one. And so it gets all mixed up to the point where, you know, people say either, you're not really sure what they mean.
Well, okay, yeah, that's true. And I think the Bible actually got this one right. Satan is the god of the world, meaning that the god of this world. the nature of this world, the fact that there are lions and that there are fucking gazelles, and that the lion chases, hunts, and kills the gazelle, and that is the nature of the lion, and that it's not a fallen nature. It's the way things are meant to be, because, hey, it's competition, it's evolution, it's survival of the fittest, it's natural selection. I think these are, there is no analog to that. There is no like God, and that this is broken nature, and that it's not a disorder. It is the order. Satan is the order. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, if you want to get beyond that, then you have to do something different, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't think that Satan he's an adversary to understanding, or in certain understandings, but that adversarial nature is fundamental and proper. It's not a reaction. It is literally action itself, meaning Kali, meaning that this is the nature of the world.
Well, there's certainly the idea of stepping beyond, either being the flock that either fights the natural order, and I think that's a lot of the problem we have, and then becoming part of, well, again, the main problem, I think, taking off the natural man and making ourselves the enemy of the nature, and that's why are acting like we're just, as I've seen on different bathroom stalls, for some reason people like to vandalize bathroom stalls, thinking that they're going to convince you to become Christian because you put some thing about God has made us to be stewards of the earth and quote some Bible verse, or I've seen that in different ways.
Normally what I see is, for good head, call, and then it's a cell phone number. Usually from an ex-girlfriend. Yeah. Usually from an ex-girlfriend, just trying to fuck with people. for a good time call.
That's where I found out about certain stuff that goes down, is that people would leave messages on park benches and stuff like that. But I'm saying but this idea that we're just here to do what we want, it's like we don't have to be taking off the natural man. That's one of the things that I think back, and it's like, how did I ever fall for that one? But I'm, it leads to a lot of frustration, to the point where it's like, most of us who grew up going to church were taught that, at least on some level, that we're not, that unless we're married, our desires are evil. It's like, how are we supposed to pick who's going to be who we want to marry if we're not allowed to have those desires until we even figure out,
Well, Islam has that one solved. Just let your parents pick them for you. You don't even have to love the person you're with. It's arranged, so to speak. No, obviously I'm being tongue in cheek with that and really fucking silly. Yeah, there is no fucking morality. Is good and evil is a man-made dichotomy. Shakespeare said it best,
Let me. Okay, that's not loading. Well, I do think you mentioned how the lower level sort of stuff, a lot of the evoking and invoking sort of stuff that people do in ceremonial magic kind of, it sounds to me like it limits the experience, but you do have to do sort of, I talk about evoking the self in order to have experiences to maybe be attracted. If you focus on, making the change in yourself, it just allows whatever's going to come through to come through. And then you already got whatever sort of control or whatnot on that you would have.
Well, evocation is basically summoning, and invocation is basically possession. I mean, if you really want to like put words on those words to really understand what those mean within that particular paradigm. So that's why invocation has always been seen as superior magically, is because you're bringing the demon or the god within you rather than evoking it, which is to summon it outside of you, either to visible or, you know, whatever experience. But I think these are all just, like I say, they're mind games. I mean, whether it's inside or outside, there is, again, I go back to Advaita, there's no difference. It's non-dual. So like you were saying, it's like, it's much more interesting when you start to realize these ideas or states of mind within your own mind and understand where you are within that process and that you're not separate from it. Then you really start to break through those paradigmatic limits, if you will. You gonna go see Endgame?
My TV's been off for a couple months. Is that something that's just been advertised recently?
What? Don't fuck with me, bro. Avengers Endgame. The biggest movie to ever hit movies, ever. It's coming out this weekend.
Avengers used to be a comic book, right?
Yeah, dude.
Okay, I'm testing my memory here. I'm not.
It's Marvel movies, man. They've done 22 of them, or they've done 21, and this will be 22. So we've already had everything. If you're not familiar with that, you must not be a movie file. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, as well as you know, a lot of the stuff that people would find boring, it's like, well, at first it is. You know, I'm the sort of person that can sit down with one of those books of archaeological finds and figure out something that isn't mentioned in any of the literature about it, because I can, you know, again, not figure out how to not bore myself, all that stuff about pottery shards and all that, you know, and all that other stuff that occurs in those books. And, you know, you have a couple things just like I've mentioned how many of the Islamic narrations that I've made my way through, and it's like you literally have like a good 300 different tales of what Muhammad going off to use the bathroom and, you know, fetch me 5 stones, or you know, but there's like a few teachings in there, but you got to make your way through all this stuff to find the few teachings in there. And but again, I don't want to, you know, unless it's actually going into the depths of some sort of understanding or something. I wouldn't want to be, you know, people focus on stuff that they really shouldn't. You know, there's more important things to talk about, but people want to give a, you know, try going to an hour lecture where basically, you know, just wash your arms to the elbows and your face and over your feet, and they try to figure out a dozen different ways to do that. So they're sitting there explaining a dozen different ways to do that when, you know, are 5 things not to eat. And they're like, again, trying to take days trying to explain it. I'm, you know, I'm not eager to go down that route, but you know what I mean? I can not.
Well, yeah. Have you ever been to mosque?
That's what I'm saying. Sometimes.
Yeah, you have to, it's called ablution. You have to do that. You have to wash your hands a certain way. You have to wash your face a certain way, and your feet. You have to take off your shoes and shit and your socks, and yeah, it's part of their fucking traditions, and it's silly. But
what I'm saying is silly is the taking something simple into some big old giant string of lectures when there's obviously more important issues that the community would have to may want to deal with, and people are trying to, you know, go on about that. It's like, I mean, it is more complex in Judaism, but you have Jews that carry around little books of things that they flip through and, okay, I can eat that. Oh no, I can't eat that. And, you know, they take, but, you know, 5 things not to eat, 5 types of things not to eat. That's pretty simple. You think a person could get that, but after you go to a masjid, like, you know, sometime, you know, it's like, okay, people are going for the, I do understand if some people don't go all year and then they show up for Ramadan and they want to get the you know, the most basic lectures and try to stretch them out to the point where they're going to remember. But honestly, most people are going to be like, you know, a very simple, you know, spent 2 hours talking to us about this, you know, 2 nights, you know, an hour, 2 nights in a row, you know, it's no wonder why people don't want, you know, it's, you know, people don't hold you know, people don't hold their attendance the whole month, partially for reasons like that. But of course, people need, if people want something different in society, they got to step up and, you know, sort of do that instead of, oh, I'll let him give whatever lecture he wants.
Okay. So you're gonna go see Endgame then, right? I'm just fucking with you, bro. I'm fucking with you, man. I can't believe you don't even know about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, dude. It's like the best thing ever. You got to be able to do both, man. You got to be able to have a little bit of fun with your shit.
Well, I have my fun in my ways. But
well, everybody jerks off, bro. Even I jerk off. Even I jerk off, and I have a wife.
What I was surprised with, I recently got a message. YouTube has finally given me my first video where it says, "Yeah, this is an 18 or older video." And surprise, I thought it was going to be my video where I literally where I put masturbation in the title. It's in the title, and that video doesn't have age restriction, but one of the videos with the tarot card on it, because I guess there's got to be some other tarot card that has full nudity that shows that has made its way on the channel, or some other piece of art that ends up in the background. But you know,
I honestly don't think any of mine are age restricted, although I'm not entirely sure.
Well, you have a lot more subscribers than I do. I've lost my ability to live stream, which is kind of disappointing. I don't have as much space to go around with. I was going to, you know, basically just start, you know, because I've seen a bunch of graveyards, but I don't have enough time with me on my outings to go do such, to like actually, but you know, I don't have enough time to save for video to do that sort of thing. But I mean, I would take different trips, but that's sort of something I've taken a liking to, is, you know, my wanderings sort of thing. And I can't live stream because I don't have as many, you know, they've upped it to 1,000 subscribers, and I know you have a couple thousand subscribers, or I thought you did. So
no, I think I have the same 1,900 and some, and most of those are old deadheads, people that, I mean, I went through 2 phases. I left YouTube for a long time, and when I left, I was doing one kind of thing, and when I came back, I was more eclectic with my stuff. And a lot of my old subs, they hate me, and they troll me sometimes in the comments and shit like that. I really don't gain any new, and a lot of it's because I don't have a Twitter, I don't have a Facebook, I don't promote myself, I'm not a social mediaite. I use YouTube as kind of like I even fucking say it in my videos. It's kind of like being a therapist. It's like talking to somebody else in the room. If people, you know, find anything in that of value, great. If they don't, fuck them. I don't care. But I'm not out there. I'm not selling myself. I'm not promoting myself. It's not about that. It's not about you. It's about me. In other words, you know, I don't mean you personally, but I mean the viewer. So I'm not trying to, like a lot of these people, like take Allison Jones, for example. I mean, she's desperate. I can tell she's desperate to get on that alt-right bandwagon of fucking like being one of these guys like the Quartering, or one of these guys like No Bullshit, that just gets, you know, a big bump in subscribers because you're doing that alt-right talking point shit. I'm not going to be that dude. I'm going to fucking like, I'll make a video about stupid shit. I'll make a video of me cooking some fucking Kung Pao chicken.
Well, you know, I've certainly requested interviews and stuff like that, because I knew it would get could get view if it was ever granted, I'd get views and stuff like that. But it's like, You know, it's like some, you know, my channel's not going to, I do have a political list, but a lot of it's like, you know, I didn't like what was going on with one aspect. So I came up with this idea of OPEP being, you know, as a political example to overturn, you know, basically what we have. But you know, it's not the sort of politics that people like. But of course, talking about Thoth as the alt-right bird, people like, you know, people didn't even want to watch it because the alt-right thing. But it's like Sutex Hexen Hammer 666 or something like this. I used to watch his channel, but he just started doing all sorts of political videos, and it didn't seem like anything else. And I, you know, kind of dropped off from watching that channel as a result. And but I notice myself, it's like I'll do a list, I'll do one type of list, and that's what I'll focus on for a month, and then I'll do another type of list. And it's like any sort of content that I do, I'm going to do more videos at some point, particularly if somebody makes a notice and says, oh, and then I see it has an effect, and it's like, you know, what's it to me if I spend another 15 minutes or half an hour or whatever it takes to, you know, get across to one person? It's like, if it wasn't for social media, that's what you know, I used to walk around. I used to talk to people. I used to, you know, invite a couple neighbors over for a ritual. Of course, you can't do that. Doing that randomly doesn't really work too well. But you know, once you've been in a location for a little bit, you can kind of actually, it depends on your location. You know, I've you know, because I've actually you know, in you know, as so-called liberal and progressive, or whatever that's supposed to mean, as like Washington and Oregon and stuff was. It's like, no, there's Washington and Oregon, you encounter the people that are, you know, you kind of don't want to say what you are, because they're basically saying stuff like, if we were a Christian country, we'd get to kill all those that aren't. And it's like, just out of the blue, some people like say that stuff. So you don't want to, like, you know, necessarily you know, put up front that you're not, you know, all the time. Maybe just, you know, sometimes it's needed to say it, but.
Yeah, I usually, you know, I'll break people down all the time, but it's only when they bring their shit to me. Like if somebody's really preachy with me, because I see, the thing is, okay, take all your main religions, even some of your not so main religions, like even Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, which are generally classified as Christian, but they're wildly different from mainline Christianity. If they start getting really fucking preachy with me, I'll break their shit down historically, book wise. I know their books better than they do, all of them. Even Muslims. I mean, I fuck around with Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims. They always want me to convert because they know I know the Quran. They know that I have respect for the traditions. They know I have respect for the Prophet. I'm always very respectful to everyone. But when you start getting real preachy with me, I'm going to start having to mention shit you really don't want to hear. And then it starts getting ugly for those motherfuckers. And then they're like, oh shit. Like one of my favorite ones is slavery in the Bible. Don't even fuck with me about that. You know what I'm saying? I will literally destroy you with that. I will literally fucking destroy you. I mean, not you. I mean them.
Because
if they get preachy with me, especially black Christians.
Say they're different from us, we're going to enslave them, and oh yeah, we can rape our slaves too. And marriage doesn't require biblical marriage as much as these people talk. This one man, one wife thing, that's not in there. And also consent for anybody being married, that's not in there either. So you know, you found in this, you look at the history of this country, people, you know, forced marriage is basically something that's happened in every state legally. And I don't agree one bit with that, but you know, a lot of that was because, well, the Bible doesn't actually forbid it. So you had to give some people some time to figure out that maybe some of these things or maybe we shouldn't try to, you know, there were states that did say that you should execute for a single act of adultery. And we finally came to the point in this country where there's, you know, no, you know, that's it's not even a crime. But you know, over time they've adjusted their morals to fit their things. It's like you find this shift. These people used to be called liberal, and now the conservatives are you know, the liberals were far more conservative than the conservatives nowadays.
Well, I don't know, man, but abortion is a really cool one, because if you're Christian and you oppose abortion, you're really hard pressed to find any instance in the Bible where abortion is prohibited. As a matter of fact, the only mention of it is one in which it's suggested. Again, this goes back to like the slavery issue. There's no verse in the Bible that prohibits slavery, and there's dozens of verses that tell you exactly how to own slaves, exactly who you can own as slaves, how to treat your Jewish slaves, different from your non-Jewish slaves. Your non-Jewish slaves you could own in perpetuity. You would own their children in perpetuity. These were people you took in battle, conquest, etc. Jewish slaves, you had to free them after 7 years. That's the Jubilee year, etc. When you start mentioning this to people, they get really uncomfortable with it, because then they start talking about, well, we want to go back to platitudes and shit like that. Like you're saying, man. I mean, they want their cake and they want to eat it too. They want to have their book that's fucking stupid and barbaric, and they want to pretend like they have any sense of morality whatsoever, especially when it comes to stuff like adultery. What is adultery when you're Solomon and you have 500 wives and 300 concubines? What is adultery then at that point? Can you even commit adultery at that point? I mean, just, it's a new woman, just, that's a concubine, right? I mean, the guy couldn't possibly commit adultery at that point. I mean, it's silly. It has no application. The 10 Commandments, I mean, there's 2 different lists of the 10 Commandments.
And the whole idea that drawing a face is like worse than murder, it's sort of implied that that's worse than murder. And I'm like, how's that play out? That's number 2, the no graven image thing.
Well, that's because the Hebrews were trying to, everything that you read about in the Pentateuch, insofar, or the Torah, same thing, is the idea of even the verse, and this is a really weird verse that most people, like, I use it all the time. I think it's Leviticus 19, verse 19. Could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And it basically says, you shall not wear a clothing woven of 2 fabrics, meaning that polyester, in other words. So it had to be pure linen or pure cotton or whatever.
Yeah, I like to bring up things. I bring up stuff like that to, because, Ploros say people play games with English inflections of translations. Like, for example, if they find something that they don't, no, I'm going off of that. But, how it says that Jesus came to restore the law. It doesn't say he's doing away with the law. And Matthew 7:21, those who call me Lord, Lord, that doesn't, it's those who do the will of the Father, that sort of thing. So people try to pretend like all you got to do is worship Jesus and that's it. But then if he's restoring the law, you take all that stuff, either stuff you can't follow, because it's like, okay, maybe you can fast the 9th month, but who can stay up for a whole month? Jeremiah 36, is that where it says to fast the whole month, fast the 9th month of the year, and stay up every night going over the scripture? And it's like, that's a lot of time every night. I don't know how many hours it would take to do that, from that perspective. And it's like, whenever you take a poop, you have to take dirt. And I've been in someone's bathroom, had a bucket of dirt next to the toilet. And
I got a better one for you. There's only one time in the entire New Testament, well, of course, it's only going to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that Jesus is asked, what must I do to be saved? And this is the question that Christians are always like, you got to be saved. So I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? And they're like, well, you have to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. And I'm like, well, let me tell you what Jesus himself actually said. Then we go to the verse, Lord, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus' answer was very simple. He said, keep the commandments. And he wasn't talking about the 10. He was talking about the 432 or however many there were in the Mosaic law.
Well, I don't think there's 613. Some of that's kind of interpretation, but yeah. Even the thing about that weird thing where you kill a bird and you scatter about its blood, blood and feathers, and then you smear a yam. I don't know exactly. I don't remember how exactly that ritual goes down, but
Oh, I thought that was done once. I wasn't sure that was the smearing. That's the Passover. You had to smear the blood on your lamppost, or basically your
That's a different one. This is a purification one, but it's like they talk about the changing of the law. It's like I really like it. Wasn't just I talk to different audiences. I don't have to, I can go to different groups and say my thing, and not necessarily get points across. Some stuff I've just gone to a group because I figure maybe I can help them be a little more tolerant by like maybe letting gently letting them know over time that they're not so special, that sort of thing, that other people think that sort of thing. They just phrase it different. But okay, what was I thinking? Paul in the Bible, he practices the animal sacrifices, all that stuff. He has, late afternoon timed prayers and going to all that sort of stuff. And then he decides, okay, we're going to cut it down to 3 commandments. And then we're going to have 9 positive and 9 negative commandments in Galatians 5. And then he comes back again with something else. And so he's always, obviously the guy's a philosopher, not really inspired. And if you compare Paul and Jesus, there's somebody who was here the other night, and I'm like, you can't really, and as far as the worshiping Jesus, that's one of the differences. It's like in 2 places, not 12, not 13, not whatever other number you throw out. It's only 2 places in the Bible where it sounds like somebody worshiped Jesus to his face during his life. And one time he throws down and does an exorcism. I think that's Matthew 5. And another place it's narrated in different gospels, someone calls him the good Lord, and he's like, nope. There's only not me. There's only one good Lord, and that's
There's only one. There's only one that is good. Yeah, 100%.
And they play games with what's the most important commandment. They always leave out that monotheism part. They only quote the loving God part. They leave off the Hero Israel, Lord.
Hero Israel, exactly. The Lord God is one, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, they really don't know their own book. That's part of the problem. That's why whenever they come at me really hard, I come back at them and expose them for not knowing their own book. In whatever way they're coming at me, I come back at them. So,
and after, it's like I'm almost ashamed to admit that it took me. I had to read the Bible 21 times before I finally realized. Before I abandoned Christianity for good, per se. So, I mean, Christianity in terms of worshiping, I think there's maybe a, yeah, you say something, I need a glass of water.
Oh yeah, good. Well, I mean, 21 times. Wow, that's kind of interesting. I guess that's once for every book in the New Testament or something like that. Who the fuck knows? To me, historically, there's really only one thing that I find valuable about Christianity, and that is the nature of the historical Jesus. At least that's the only thing I find fascinating about that religion and its set of books. Absolutely nothing about the Old Testament that I find fascinating other than as a book of mythology. So, I mean, the nature of the historical Jesus and how Paul came to corrupt that. And then you can take, and this goes way back to the early part of our talk when I was mentioning a book, but I didn't actually have the name right off the top of my head, but I remember it now. It's a book called the Pseudo-Clementine Recognitions. And it's a book in which you can see James, the brother of Jesus, who was thrown down from the precipice of the temple because he was the head of Jerusalem Christianity. Even the Bible admits that. And he was thrown down, and it's always assumed that he was thrown down, I believe, by Annas, who was like the son of Caiaphas or some shit like that, or maybe it was the other way around. But in the Pseudo-Clementine Recognitions, it's actually Paul that did this, because Paul was actually a Roman agent, even though he was a Jew. So he was like a compromised Jew, kind of like Josephus. So he was a compromised Jew that basically went in as an agent provocateur to disrupt this movement that was early Christianity, that was basically the bloodline of Jesus or his brothers, because Jesus didn't have any kids. At least I don't think he did. I think if he did, we would know about it for certain. But he did have a rack of brothers, 5 brothers, and they were part of a revolution. They were what we would consider today to be Palestinian terrorists. They were, operating against Rome. So then you had the Roman agent, the Roman agent Paul, Saul of Tarsus, agent provocateur, that went in and basically disrupted that movement from the inside. So
hence the 2 thieves, because they didn't really
kill
him. So it was,
and Barabbas, it's the son of the Father, right? Yeah, Jesus Barabbas in some texts.
Well, that was if you look at what was said and what was done, as I probably mentioned, the Aramea book of that was pretty much the basis of what we'd call the later book of Revelations, but it wasn't that at that time. He did prophesy about going in with 2, and he was going to die between 2, and the guy actually died between 2 after storming the temple, fulfilling his own prophecy. Where he actually died, there is some dispute of where he died.
Well, the thing is, and most scholars will, most New Testament scholars will admit this, is Jesus was killed for one reason and one reason alone. And that was that he was the quote unquote king of the Jews, which meant something very specific in that time. Because, and this goes back to the Essenes again, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, as you were referring to earlier, is that there was this tradition. Like if you read Josephus and you read about all these, actually go back to Maccabees. It's the Maccabean line, like Judas Maccabee, right? And in the revolts against Rome. And Rome was basically an occupying force within Palestine. And the idea that there would be a king of the Jews, right? That was the thing that could not be tolerated. So that's why Jesus was killed. The Inri, even Inri that was put above his cross, right? It's Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, Rex Judeorum or whatever, but they didn't have the J, so it was just the I. So it was INRI. So Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's why he was killed. Historically, that's beyond doubt. Now, the thing about him claiming to be the Son of God, I think that's all, or him blaspheming, and like he had 2 separate trials, one before the Sanhedrin and one before Pilate. I think that's all later fucking addition to the real story, which is basically he was a terrorist. I mean, from a certain point of view, I mean, justified.
Some of the, yeah, there are some exaggerations there, but as I said, it depends on which person you're. Certainly, Judah Barabbas, Ben Judah, Barabbas, of course, being the Greek nickname. Obviously, that guy was, the Romans had to take him out, and but the sitting back and taking time in the trial, and maybe Caesar would not have said, would not have given a chance to anybody who they considered guilty. They weren't giving it up to the crowd to decide what to do with them and that sort of thing. That's our, the sort of I wash my hands of this sort of gesture, maybe, but not the.
Well, no, the interesting thing is that one of his own brothers is the one. Obviously, it's Judas. Judas was one of his brothers. He was one of the 5, and he was the one that turned him in. He's the one that ratted him out, basically. So, I mean, that's what I was saying when you went to, take a piss break or whatever the fuck. You were just like, hey, talk, bro. And I was just talking about the only thing that I find interesting about the entire corpus of the Bible is the historical Jesus. And like the entire Old Testament, this is just pure mythology to me. I don't think there's any historical merit to it whatsoever, But I treat it like I would treat the Greek or Roman myths,
Well, one of the things I found interesting about that Mysteries of the Bible series, once you know the archaeology, it's like, wait, every single one of these episodes, there's some sort of proof against part of the story of the Bible, and like every single one of those stories, but they kind of, and even if it wasn't true, it's like the story of Esther. What the Vashti literally means the good wife. So even if you don't take that as, oh, she just got a good name, but she's the better behaved. It's a horror. It's not the best of example that you just, oh, the king's going to sleep around and he's going to pick one of us, so you better oil yourself up and be willing to do whatever you want. And you kind of, and then she's vindictive and suspicious and has people killed, basically preemptively, just once she does get herself some power. But it's not what you'd expect the conservatives to put forward as a good example for women. But they were really doing this in the years leading up to the election of our current president, which I think actually factored into that guy being elected, is that they were pushing the Book of Esther.
Really, I don't know about that, man. That seems kind of funny.
But I definitely, one of the things that I've found is virtually every single one of these religions, you look at their own book, and it's like there's something about that book that kind of makes it clear that the thing that they have is not quite what they're labeling. It's like, Zarathustra. Zarathustra was, he wanted everybody to be, and I think they all did. I think they all came forward and said, wanting, hey, here's how you can be your own priest and they wanted a nation of priests and priestesses. That's why they called them the Magi, because they were sort of the skilled ones, because they didn't leave it, as everybody doing their kushti and all that. Confucius, Mencius founded what you found. If you compare, it seems that Mencius founded Confucianism, and basically, some of these figures, it's hard to tell. It's like the Socratic problem is basically the problem of every single prophetic figure, almost every single prophetic figure you're ever going to see. And is that Turtle looking at? Yeah, he's looking over here.
You're funny, that Turtle. I thought that was all just fake background. I'm just kidding. But yeah, you mean the Socratic problem of identifying who the real Socrates was, right? That you mean beyond the character in Plato's dialogues.
It's like no one called it, as far as what I have found, no one called it Judaism until you had the second book of Maccabees. And Judaism, as we can call it Judaism, you can take it back to about 540, and you really can't take it back any further if you look at that. But it was never one Judaism. And Christianity, I don't think Paul appeared on the scene. I don't think necessarily. I'm not sure that Paul would have that it was completely solidified. That, I mean, he may have started a few small gatherings, which is actually, look at the wording. Most of it, people act like, oh no, it's people accepting en masse by the millions, and no, it was a handful of people at this one lady's house and a handful of people at this other lady's house, and it really wasn't that big of gatherings to start with. But I think pretty soon it was again broken up in different movements. But it becomes very clear that figure after figure was not it. I don't remember all the Krishna is again there's 4 people that you can find. I don't remember all the names at this point because and it's really less common of one that you can bring up, but the one they consider the Krishna incarnate is really, at least 4 people, and there's 24 characters in the India area that it was like some sort of secret. It wasn't really that they claimed to be gods in their life. Other people later kind of put that. And I guess just like Buddhism, I think, it started off with Buddha yoga was the first thing to appear. And then a lot of it became this, taking refuge with the Buddha instead of per se taking refuge, taking on the example, the indication of taking refuge with them kind of went a direction that it didn't seem to start with.
Wow, there's a lot there to work with. Let me go back to the one that I started with, which is Jesus and what you were saying about Paul and early Christianity. One of the things that I think is that Christianity is actually an amalgam, like you were saying, and you're talking about these historic figures and how they're not ultimately reducible to one actual historical figure, but they could be kind of like over time, a blending of different individuals and kind of like an amalgam of these individuals put together, like you said, the 4 Krishnas, which I'm not familiar with. That was interesting to hear that. I didn't think we could trace Krishna back at all historically. I thought that was pure mythology. But that shows you my understanding of Hinduism.
One of them is in a place that's underwater. That's exactly where they said it was, but it's underwater right now. But you know, there's a variation in the actual dates of the figures, and the oldest one was 7,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago. I forget exactly when it says this character was, but it gave a description of where he was. You know, the Varka, and it turns out there actually is some evidence of settlement back, you know, thousands of years ago when that wasn't underwater.
No, I mean, that's completely interesting. And as far as the Buddha goes, I actually do think that there was an Indian prince, Gautama, but within Buddhism proper, I mean, especially within Mahayana, which ultimately, you know, gets you to the higher belt levels, you're not really talking about that one guy. Although I do think that the sutras that we do have, legitimate sutras from that one guy, and we can tell that there's pretty much a singular tradition, at least early on, meaning the Hinayana school, which is basically the whitest of white belts. Actually, it's a no belt because they're the most atheistic, philosophical school. They don't, and, you know, Buddha never claimed to be God. As a matter of fact, anyone called him God, he rebuked them, just like Jesus did, as you mentioned. The only 2 times anybody ever dared worship Jesus, he corrected that shit right away. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I think we can go back, you know, to a certain degree, and I find these studies to be fascinating. I mean, there's a lot written on the historical Muhammad, which is also interesting because, you know, there's, with regard to Jesus, there's what's known as the mythicist tradition, which is basically that there was no actual Jesus, that it was all a story. There's actually a school that believes that there was no Muhammad, that it was actually a story. And I find that fascinating because most scholars think that Muhammad is extremely well attested as a historical figure. But there are some people, like one scholar's name is Patricia Crone, and she makes a very compelling case that there was no actual Muhammad. At least if there was, that all of the stories we have, all the hadith, all the, you know, life stories of Muhammad, that these were not based in the area that is traditionally known as Mecca, Medina, that, you know, that Arabian area, that it had to have been situated somewhere else, just because the trade routes at the time didn't go through that area. That was basically arid. It was basically desert, you know. But yeah, I mean, we start getting into these historical questions. I think they're fascinating. I mean,
well, a lot of people jump the gun. They say, you know, they look at one group of evidence, and it turns out there is evidence for a claim, and they just presume that, well, I don't know of anything, and this scholar didn't know of anything, so they make conclusions. I do see, like, you know, particularly when it comes to the schools of thought, you actually do have times where the different things appeared. The body appeared during, you know, during the Caliphate of Uthman, and when everybody was getting sick of the Umayyads and trying to figure out a way to overturn them, you got what you called, what you could call Shia, but they weren't Shia in the way that we think of Shia now. And the Sunnis and the Shia both took hundreds of years after that point to establish their schools of thought, and all the meanwhile recording some of these traditions, which actually kind of refute some of these things. It's like in Najul Balagha, there's a narration of a sermon of Ali where he's basically pointing, he wanted no favor whatsoever for being related to Muhammad or knowing Muhammad. He didn't think that anybody should be given favor because of that. He was directly rebuking basically both what you call the stereotypical Shia and Sunni, because they both, you know, think one or the other. Well, not always, but that's sort of the stereotype of it. But you know,
well, yeah,
interpretations based on interpretations. You know, it's almost as bad. It's almost as bad in parts as what you see with the Talmud, where you don't even know where it's coming from, and sometimes it's even against the original, you know, saying or scripture verse or something to begin with. And it's being presented like it's, you know, the authoritative interpretation, like you can do nothing else. And, you know.
Well, I always was under the assumption that the Talmud, I mean, well, there's two, right? There's the Babylonian and then there's the other one. I forget which the other one is, but I thought those were kind of medieval. I thought
Yeah,
those were relatively late.
those were, you know, further on. I'm just drawing the analogy of what they call, you know, the fiqh, the understanding. Well, you know, because typically when you say someone has a degree in that, I forget what the Arabic word for a license is at this point, but it's not that they understand the stuff directly from themselves like a fundamentalist. They take classes of what these traditional interpretations are, and maybe they try to figure out how to tell them apart, you know, between the different schools and stuff like this. But these things took a long time to develop, and then they decide, and that's actually part of the problem, is that they've, you know, instead of trying to go back, they're trying to say this. And nowadays, the people trying to go back tend to be the people that are saying, I mean, the people most vocable, the ones you hear about, are the Salaf Saleh people, and they're like trying to justify. As I said, they're trying to justify things based on people who knew Muhammad, maybe people who knew Muhammad, that sort of thing. That anything they said or did, they're trying to justify something based on that. And you do find in the books that a lot of the harsher stuff comes from them, and a lot of stuff maybe came from you know, it's like some of these people related the stories that were the Jews and the Christians and stuff were saying, and they admitted where it was coming from. That, oh, this is an old Arab legend, this is this, and but that kind of got lost in some of the, you know, some of the, you know, so you actually have to go back 200 years before what most people are going to tell you about to figure out what the origin of this thing is. It's like, oh, it turns out to be this guy's opinion, or this guy's telling a story from somewhere else. And then somebody at some point decides that maybe he's saying something about Muhammad. So you can kind of, you know, it's that's I guess the trick with the Islamic tradition, is the deconstruction of what comes from where.
Yeah, exactly. Those are called isnads. Those are chains of transmission. And what they found is that the ones that the scholars that they, you know, that you always hear it was said to, you know, the prophet said to so and so, said to so and so, said to so and so. That's called a chain of transmission. And you find that the latest, or the later ones, have the most detail. So you can see that it's an invention process, meaning that you're not actually, the earliest of these isnads is always the most primitive. And then it's kind of like, okay, take for example, a guy that I think actually did exist, but who we almost know nothing about, is a guy named Arthur of Britain, right? Or Arthur of Wales. We call him King Arthur, right? And then he's got the Knights of the Round Table, and he's got Excalibur, and he's got Guinevere, and he's got Mordred, and he's got, you know, Sir Gawain, and all these other people, all that shit. Well, some of it goes back to the earliest layers, but not all of it. It's interesting. Mm. So, like, you can have that grain of historical truth. Like another guy that I think was a real guy. This is going to shock you when I say this. I think Hercules was a real guy at one point in time.
I think maybe even you know, strip the God character off it. I think you know, Horus was there was actually King Horus about 5,100 years ago or something like that they found an inscription of an actual King Horus, King Hor, you know, and then, you know, centuries later, you end up having a god, having an entity that they considered a god as a Horus. And I think time and time again, the heroes, some of them are prophetic figures, some of them were kings, some of them were of different sorts. They just, you know, person after person, they decided that they, over time, started treating the person as a god. And, you know, once it's, you know, once the centuries have gone and you've actually remember the person, it's so much easier than the person around, which gets me to how these people fall for these people that basically make such grand claims that they, you know, I am the incarnation of God and all this stuff. And it's like, and sometimes it's so obvious, like, you know, like the one guy that I've talked about so much, that he can't, he said he basically can't talk. He basically becomes deathly ill from eating white bread, dairy, or drugged chicken or something, and yet he does it time and time again. But he figures, I'm not going to lose my job as ruler of these people. I've done it before. So, but he's the most spiritually advanced, and he can't keep himself from killing himself at the dinner table. Wouldn't surprise me at the least that he injures himself eating enough one time to, actually kick the bucket. I myself, they basically told me, I could die in 3 to 6 months if I just switch back to the American diet of cheese and white bread and stuff. And as something I have, it's at least once a week, if not even more. I've bleed after bleed. What was this?
Now I was giving a thumbs down to the American diet, but one guy within our lifetime that I think that we can start seeing some of this vector. I don't know. You were talking about it. Maybe you were talking about David Christ or something like that. But one guy that we can really refer to within our lifetime that actually did have a massive following is Reverend Sun Myung Moon from Korea. You know who that guy is, right? The Moonies.
Yeah, I've heard of the Moonies, and the singing was part of their thing, and they kind of like tried. You'd go off to your thing, and they have mass marriages, and they have.
But it's supposedly Christian because he's the reincarnation of Christ. So, as a matter of fact, they own the Washington Times, which is the second biggest newspaper where I'm at, which is basically Washington D.C. Metro.
Oh, I had no idea of that. I knew they had some money up their sleeve, but I didn't know that they.
Yeah, they own the Washington Times, it's very conservative newspaper. Second to the Washington Post, which is like one of the top 3 in the whole country. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy's Christian. Yeah, they did the mass marriages because he was the guy officiating the marriage, and he was the reincarnation of Jesus. So that's why they would do that. That's why the followers would do that. But that's somebody within our own lifetime that has achieved this type of status. And we can see, like, if you go back to like a guy like maybe a century before, is a Joseph Smith. And we know all about him as a historical figure and how much of a fraud he was. And yet look how big the Mormon church is. You know what I mean? And then we know, like,
I've talked to somebody that basically, because they were raised Baptists, they thought somebody could do it better than them, because he basically taught that you basically think and feel about stuff and you pay attention to it, and that's supposedly your gift from God. So they heard about Joseph Smith and they're like, oh, this guy sounds like he does it better than me. And it's like, they're just basically getting ideas and making up stuff just like everybody else, but they've spiritualized the whole process. And, I guess that's, and now the movement is not so much, when my father was a kid, but during my life, more and more of the movement against amongst most Baptists is, basically faith alone, and any of this just be baptized and feel like you're called to, that Jesus really saved you, and that's it. And you have a group that's actually trying to better society, and they're particularly, the other Baptists in particular are particularly afraid of the Latter-day Saints, because it's like they're rising and they're falling.
Well, actually, I think they're both rising a little bit, but thing about Mormonism is it didn't really get big within Joseph Smith's lifetime. It was Brigham Young that really kind of grew that religion. So it was kind of like the St. Paul to fucking Jesus, in other words. So, it takes time for these things to work out. But the reason I mentioned the Moonies and the Mormons, and even I was going to do it, and I didn't want to do it, but I'm going to do it, Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard. I don't even consider it a religion. It's a faux religion. It's a fucking fake bet that he made with somebody that he could create a religion and dupe people, and it worked.
Paul Twitchell, the founder of Eckankar, hanged out with Paul knew Paul Twitchell beforehand, and was actually number 3 in Scientology. But I guess he decided to branch off and do his own thing. But yeah, Scientology was just a failed form of psychology, so he decided to shift it to something else because his Dianetics thing wasn't catching on.
Well, yeah, but he made a bet that he could fucking make a religion.
Yeah, and that's verified too. It's also verified the fact that he was seeking speak against your mainstream psychology, and he was seeking his veterans benefit psychological treatment at the end of his life. And of course, he'd switched all his science fiction writing, became real teachings to the group. Just like Paul Twitchell wrote his whole life, and he found a religion and rewrote everything to be part of his Eckankar group.
Yeah, that's interesting. Almost reminds me of Madame Blavatsky, who wrote two really awesome, very lengthy books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, which if you've ever worked your way through either one of those, both in 2 volumes, at least the way I had them. Actually, there's a funny story. I gave my copy of The Secret Doctrine, both volumes, to a homeless guy in my neighborhood that was really into the occult and spirituality and shit like that. I still have my Isis Unveiled. I think now they put them in 1 volume. I could be mistaken about that. But Blavatsky's spirituality, theosophy was just so convoluted and so eclectic, and just, you know, this whole idea of, you know, the different races, and it was very racist, you know, understanding of humanity and history and everything else, and the Atlanteans and the you know, the continent of Mu and all that bullshit. So yeah, I mean,
well, I found actually, are you aware that Herodotus told us, he said that Atlantis was a place that the people there said that they have been saying for even before Herodotus and such, that their mythical leader was called Atlantis was actually the mythical leader of the Berbers, and the Atlantean culture actually would have been northwestern Africa, the Eye of the Sahara. Instead of what people typically think about Atlantis, it could be that Atlantis is, again, you know, and there was evidence of trade, both in genetics and in goods, you know, across the north of Africa back when it wasn't completely desert covered at that point.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you and say that I think that Atlantis was Antarctica. Yeah, I swallow that theory, which is basically the Flemmaths. They wrote a book, When the Sky Fell. It's a very short book, but it basically details their theory of Atlantis. I find that one to be the most plausible of any that I've heard, and I've heard of them all. You know, I mean, like it's Crete, or it's you know, the Minoan culture, essentially. You know, I don't think any one of them fits perfectly. Like, you know, it's the Azores Islands or whatever the fuck. You know, I've never heard that one that you said before, that it was Central Africa at a time when, you know, like maybe go back to the Sphinx.
Yeah, you look at the description of the rocks, and and the size of the, you know, and the size of the concentric.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was worried about, was that it's described as like kind of a continent in of itself, with these, you know, 7 concentric rings or what have you.
It's a geological structure that people hung out, and water actually flowed in that far at one point. I mean, very consistently, and then at some point it stopped being that case overnight, basically. But it's more or less a natural structure that they would have built upon.
So let me ask you this: what do you think about the fact that they've detected with sonic, basically detection, that there is a chamber underneath one of the paws of the Great Sphinx, and Egyptologists refuse to allow excavation? What do you think about that refusal of excavation on
There's been some excavation in the plateau that revealed some pretty strange stuff, you know, like a symbolic tomb of Osiris and stuff like this underground, that they had to pump out water. And I don't know what exactly is going on that they don't show some of the stuff. It's like if they've carbon dated an inscription in the Sphinx to being thousands of years before, not the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid, that basically it's this symbolic looking thing that actually basically shows that can be interpreted as your basic soul doctrine. I know the Egyptians weren't one religion. That's, you know, that's oversimplification, just like
100%.
What?
100%. The dynasties, we're talking centuries upon centuries.
But it's apparent geologically and otherwise that the ancient Egyptians just something went way, way back, and they knew what they were talking. It turns out some of the pharaohs actually made their way across that impassable thing of the desert through the technique of bring more than we need, leave some, go back, and basically create a chain back, heading southwest into the place where they said they came from. And it turns out that they have formed a cultural link, and then that link can kind of be tied way back. But I don't know why certain things aren't being done in terms of the pyramids and some other stuff that they found chambers that they're leaving alone. And it's not just structural, because you can figure out how to at least peer in and see what's going on.
Yeah, they had that little robot, I remember, that went through one of the shafts and found that little kind of door or whatever the hell. It was not really a door, but it's tiny. I mean,
and have you poured through the footage? They talk about one pharaoh. It turns out that at least 5 pharaohs have their names written in that pyramid. So just like the later English and French, and even the Germans, and not the Germans, the French, the Romans and the Greeks put their names in there too. So I'm thinking, what they talk about, they just took the first cartouche they found and said, this is the pharaoh that did it. And you look around this, I saw this video with Zahi Hawass, and you can click, to slow frame it, and you can see 5 different cartouches in that same room, in that same video. It's like 5 different pharaohs. Which pharaoh is it? It's probably, they might have put their mark on some. I think every case the pyramid.
That's kind of what I'm saying when you mentioned Zahi Hawass, and I mentioned him already earlier. Is I think he's a dishonest actor. I don't know what that guy's doing, but he's the guy that's blocking a lot of this research.
I think he's one of the characters of that dictator. There was that a dictator who actually had somebody killed in the states back in 1991. There was this guy Rashid Khalifa who basically,
I know who he is. He's the guy that wrote the new interpretation of the Quran as the last testament,
and required at least 500 Islamic narrations to do it, and then told us everybody, no narrations. It's like, dude, you took over 500 to make your commentary, and a lot of his followers defected when they figured that out. They actually formed their own masjid.
He was the guy that did the miracle, the mathematical miracle of the Quran, the number 19, and all the surahs, and how they all, numerically equal. Like there's, for example, like a
lot of that's overblown. So some of that's pretty, but he plays games with several different verses that turn something into a technical term to kind of make it sound different than it is.
No, I agree. I agree that he does twist shit, and it's
like your typical person who claims to be I am the prophet, I should be followed, that sort of thing. He didn't say it those words. He was a little more sneaky with it, but it was like it took him. A lot of people have experiences. I've talked to people who went on Hajj, who've slept in the masjid overnight during one of the nights during Ramadan, and had just as strong of experiences. But he took 17 years to kind of declare himself, I am Rasulullah, and my message is that and eventually he had to kick out 2 verses of the Quran. But here's why he's killed.
Saying exactly, he had to kick 2 out to make his number system work. I was getting ready to say that, but you beat me to it.
And someone else came in, and independent parties came in later and said that to make the same point, actually you can make more points by leaving those 2 verses in. But he got killed because he was part of the UN, and he tried to distribute stuff to countries. He made some good points. He said that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran were too strict, and here were the Quran verses that kind of pointed out that they were going too far. And he basically got himself banned and all his followers. And somebody who worked for a couple guys who actually worked for the dictator in Egypt came over and killed him. And his following grew after that point because he treated him like a martyr. He wasn't a martyr he was a martyr for political reasons. It wasn't because of some blasphemy thing. It was because he made the Egyptian dictator look bad, and the guy sent someone after him.
That wouldn't have been Anwar Sadat, would it?
1991, the guy was in there for...
Yeah, that's the only leader of Egypt I can remember is Anwar Sadat, but that's just my lack of foreign policy expertise.
But of course, yeah, all these things, you know, it's people, parties, countries, you know, it all really goes beyond that. I agree. You know, it's like you can't really use the... I don't remember how's that? There's a phrase in the Bible where basically Jesus said, the Jesus character says not to fight for your country, and it wasn't that he was saying you can't fight in self-defense or something. It was well, I mean, I interpret that, I accept that concept in the way of, you know, you kind of got to do what's best for the world. You can fight for self-defense or something, but not because your country wants to go off and do something, you know. You know, it just wants to conquer and spread its power and stuff like that. I you know, don't agree with that. And that was, I'm not too clear. I'm not thinking.
Or neither am I. You're talking about a verse I've never fucking heard before where Jesus is talking about country. I don't think I ever heard him talk about country, but I don't know.
Well, I think I've probably been reminded of the more clearly of the verse by watching old Prince, like old Prince interviews, and he was basically explaining why he didn't vote, and I'm like, you know, so there's my kingdom's not of this world, yes, but there's some other stuff, and it kind of got. I think I probably looked up stuff after Prince, after watching Prince, and
Prince, you talking about Raspberry Beret Prince, or are you talking about...
Yeah, Raspberry Beret Prince, not...
Are you serious? No, you're not serious. You're fucking with me. You're talking about pop star Prince?
Yeah, I wasn't, you know, I did buy, I won a Nirvana book. I bought one of my own. I probably bought a couple. I usually, you know, even when that was more of my life, like back when I would, you know, sit down and learn about, you know, I wouldn't consider myself a fan in some respects. I certainly, you know, even if I had the resources, I wouldn't have ended up on a show like Fanatic, that MTV thing back in the day. I didn't watch much MTV.
Let me ask you this: if you like Prince, have you ever heard the song Seven?
Seven?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. I've never made my way through the guy's catalog in any sense.
Oh, dude, you should seriously. This is his best song ever. It's called Seven. Just if you go to YouTube and search Prince 7, S-E-V-E-N, it's his best song ever, and you're gonna like it because it's very. I don't want to say religious. It is religious though. You're gonna like it, dude. Trust me. If you're talking about this, because yeah, I thought you were fucking with me when you're talking about Prince. You're talking about the pop star. Yeah, you need to listen to Seven. Seriously.
Well, I like. He had some. He was sort of the. You know, there were some musicians growing up that I wasn't allowed to. You know, was discouraged very strongly. You're lifting up your hands for some reason. But Prince.
Seven, bro. Seven.
Oh. Okay, I didn't see how many fingers. It was because Prince was weird, but the style that he puts into it, Prince was as good as at the evocative thing as Zeppelin was.
Oh, he was the man, dude. I love Prince. Prince
could play. As much as there were definitely people better than at any particular thing. It's like you don't have to like all his music, but honestly, I can't think of anybody that was as broadly skilled as a musician as Prince. It's very hard to think of someone.
Oh, dude, you're not going to get no argument out of me, dude. I love me some Prince. Little Red Corvette, When the Doves Cry, Diamonds and Pearls, bro. I mean, I could go all day with dude, man. But I'm telling you, Seven. Look it up. You'll like me after that.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to remember that because, yeah.
I've
also figured out
fall.
What?
All seven, and we'll watch them fall.
Oh,
That's how it starts.
Oh, okay. I don't really remember much, but okay.
It's almost like a Book of Revelations type of song, dude. You have to listen to it, man. You're gonna fucking you're gonna trip when you hear it, dude. I don't mean trip over the stairs or nothing. I mean you're gonna fucking you're gonna be like, what? This dude.
I had a series of dreams once, and that was actually one of the things that and 7 was something, and this 5 was something. It was like my own personal little jumbled little dream book up in my that came out of my dreams or something. And 7 was one of the number. It was like the main number in it, I think.
Well, it's one of those. It's 3, 7, and 12, right? Those are the magic numbers.
Well, 5, 7, and 50, I think, were the numbers that came up.
Those are more Babylonian, I think, in context, wouldn't you say?
Well, the idea was that Marduk took on the names of, it's the whole later on the whole Tawhid doctrine. It's like Marduk basically took the place of all the other ones that these 50 ones, they're really me. At least in the couple variations of that mythology. And so the Necronomicon did get it right in that respect. Although I do understand it was a representative text more than, some sort of real tradition. Because definitely, if you know anything about Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian,
it was all base 12.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at what the Necronomicon claims, it's obviously they can't tell the difference between the one and the other, and you really can't translate anything if you can't tell the difference between one or the other. Actually, there's probably a couple characters that would carry over between the one and the other, but yeah, you can't render what they put down.
I kind of have a Sumerian beard a little bit, right?
I had a vision once of an entity because I performed this ritual. I just off the top of my head, because stuff jumbled around that I encountered. I've just where this entity had a scary beard. Its beard was scary.
What, it had like shit coming out of it, like bugs and stuff?
No, it was something about the form of it was like just, and the color of the whole creature. It's just like your typical, North African looking dude, but his beard was scary. So that kind of put the end to that sort of practice for a while for me. Some guy, some creature with a, yeah, it's sort of that feeling I can't even put in myself. The appearance of this thing in the bathroom there. Of course, I was, and it wasn't because I was a beardless youth. I was fine with beards, But I kind of think that maybe like the Egyptians, kind of the way they tied their beard was like some sort of imitation of some creature or something. Like, do you have any particular theories of that may not be usable about any particular spiritual entity or species of entity? For example, in my experience, I think Baphomet's not a single being. Baphomet is like a species of like these sort of, but in its true form, like it's not. A goat head's only the way we can describe it when we get out here and when we, try to talk about it. But it's like something more than that,
Well, I think doesn't historically the Baphomet go back to the Knights Templar and the head that they supposedly venerated?
Well, I mean the term, but but it definitely goes back into to different pan cults and stuff like this. Could be tied to the whole, okay, where did this come from? But I think there's like and I don't think it's some order of 9 angles sort of blood vampire up there, a male and a female Satan basically sitting over the earth, and Baphomet's the female, and I don't really buy that, but.
Well, no, again, I mean, I think, you can get into mythologies and stuff like that. You wanted mine. I guess, would be Aleister Crowley. He had LAM. Are you familiar with that? LAM?
The Ameladreth workings, was that the ones? It's sort of a gray alien looking creature.
Exactly, 100%. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, but he did it before there was the phenomenon of the gray alien. So he kind of like preceded that. So like if I was going to talk about a phenomenon like that, you know, that would be the origin of it, and then the fucking, you know, the whole phenomenon that came after it, meaning the gray alien phenomenon. So yeah.
So since one thing that I talk about on my channel is conspiracy theories, so is there any particular one that you would confirm or say there's absolute proof to deny?
Well, no, there's a couple that are confirmed, but we know those already, like the Gulf of Tonkin, that kind of shit. One that I really like, although I don't really believe it, but one that I just like is we never went to the moon. I think that's a fun one. I think we did go to the moon, but I just think it's fun to think we didn't. Another one I like is Building 7, 9/11 conspiracy, although I don't think it was an inside job. I just think these are fun, you know, stories. Can I confirm or deny that your turtle is moving around? No, I can't. Oh, shit, look at you, man. You're a funny dude, man. No, man, I mean, see, the thing about conspiracy theories, why I say it's a fun thing, is that it's almost a better world in the sense that it would require more intelligence for those things to be true than for them to be the way we understand them. Meaning, it would be a lot harder to fake the moon landing than it would be to actually land on the moon. It would be a lot harder to make 9/11 an inside job than it would be just to allow it to be what it is. So I think that's why we like conspiracies as human beings, is because it engages our imagination. You know, we can see patterns where there are none, you know. Another one that I really liked a long time ago was the face on Mars, right? You remember that one? It's a face on Mars, bro.
Yeah, some of those pictures look pretty convincing until you realize wait a second, every angle, and it's like
it's just a mound.
it's like you know, it's like with the art of projection. It's like you can program memories into people. You can, if they don't know the techniques of, oh, if you do this, it can smart. You can actually. They figured out the function in the brain that causes you to have like flashbacks and interactive memories with the dead and stuff like this. They've actually figured out how that exactly goes down. But you can program your set, you know, it's like how many people think, so think of what you're, you know, they do it more subtle than this and more, but it's like, think of your life in ancient Egypt or ancient Greece and all this. And, you know, the people that program their memories of all sorts of stuff. And as I was saying, with like people looking at stuff being inspired, it's like, yeah, you talk about Joseph Smith. Clearly he waited, you know, he looked at, you know, he couldn't read something and he looked at something. He thought, what if this was a Christian document, and then wrote something down? I'm like, but when you're that biased with your method, you come up with all sorts of stuff. But a lot of conspiracy theories, I think the issue that occurs is that people, like, it removes some sense of responsibility for a person. Is like, you know, we're whatever our capability or situation, we're responsible to act in a certain thing. And conspiracy theories are a way for people to distract themselves and kind of not do the work that they could do, and basically blame it. See, so I'm oppressed, and you know, it's like how many targeted individual videos on YouTube of people that are just thinking, what?
Actually, I disagree. I think that the lure of conspiracy theories is that you have some knowledge that other people do not have. So this is why the flat earth is on the rise, which is just some complete and utter bullshit. but people want to have that because they're like, well, I know the truth and you don't. I don't think it's an excuse. I think it's almost like a new kind of, well, not, it's new in this case, but basically in general, these conspiracy theories are a type of esotericism, meaning that it's like we're privy to the secrets that you don't know.
Oh, I do agree that that's the factor. I just think that it's more along the lines of people not, on some level, not wanting to, wanting to place the blame somewhere. Because what I see for the most part are sort of placing the blame theories, and I see people not getting things done. I've time and time again. Of course, that sticks out a lot.
Yes.
Maybe it's a, it could be a perception thing that I see someone here wasting, not getting things done, someone here not wasting their things, but all these people over here that obviously have expressed some sort of thing, but they're not really casting their life down as a result.
Yeah, somewhat. You know what? One of the other ones that I wanted to mention, I didn't mention, is the moon is hollow, made out of metal, and it's an artificial satellite. Trust me, that's a real theory. And it's fun. And it's fun, dude. I don't believe it for a second, but it's fucking, it's fun.
I forget what there was, before the moon landings and even after them, some of the people's like, so a lot of it was just like the flat earthers. It's some sort of spiritual theory of some sort. But the, there's videos of scientists back in, the 60s even saying, it seems like the moon's this, and so there's not going to be a moon landing. And, people look back at the videos and say, see, they knew it was impossible. They were just going to fake us all. And, it's obviously very clear that there was a moon landing, but yeah, people want to feel special. And that's what I've encountered involving myself with different groups is that, even something as I've may have already said in this conversation, even something as simple as Christianity, you have people saying your typical, I can't see that too well. You're going to have to say something so the picture goes bigger. Oh, the flowers? Upside down lotuses?
Oh, it's a piece I got.
I try to encode information in my paintings, not to be mysterious, but as a way of trying to, just render more information into the thing. Like color coding the Enochian stuff, kind of, so my mind can flash between the attributes and stuff like this. It's much quicker. They were going to do that with Chinese because Chinese was the quickest language to read as far as languages that people will typically use, and they were going to color code it to make it even quicker. And I guess about 20 years later, it still hasn't really caught on.
Well, I think can you hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I think Chinese is like the closest we have left to Egyptian, meaning it's a hieroglyphic language, pictograms. So like each character is unique. It's not, in other words, it's not really phonetic in the way it's written. It's more written based on characters. So yeah, I guess you could say it's more expressive in that sense.
Well, the hieroglyphics were basically just phonetic with determinatives. So, but a lot of the languages, it's not so obvious. It's like, here's the symbol for a tree and here's a symbol for this, and that's how they put together the language. And you just don't see it unless you know it. But once it's pointed out, you kind of know it.
Okay. I mean, you know a lot more about Egyptian than I do. So, I mean, I'm a fan, but you're a scholar or student, I tend to focus on other things because Egyptian, although I respect the hell out of that, all the dynasties and stuff, probably the culture that lasted the longest of any human culture on the planet, but it's kind of dead now. So try to focus on what's alive.
Well, it's more of the influence and seeing you know, the sort of framework and stuff that was there before. It's like in the 70s, there was a book put out that basically showed how the ancient Egyptians had the themes of all the tarot cards. I mean, they didn't have, like people thought, that, you know, some people say that under the paw of the Sphinx is a room that has the trumps or the whole tarot deck basically painted as some sort of progression or something. And I don't buy into that, but they did, you know, I saw the book, and, you know, they did make a really good point that all these sorts of states and stations, as I would call the tarot deck in general, you know, they were there painted out, or carved up for, you know, for people to see. And, you know, they had examples, and I don't even know what the book was called, you know, because it's definitely a book I would have liked to have around. I don't even know if it was one I had or borrowed or what the deal was, but.
Well, you know, you can always get back to Zahi Hawass about that bullshit, right? Have him dig it up for you. You were talking about Under the Paw of the Sphinx. That was
one thing. As much as I appreciate all this ancient stuff and whatnot, all these. Whether it's tourism or archaeology or whatnot, I am for what the people living now, let them, you know, I understand maybe trying to figure out a way not to overturn some ancient site or something like that, but, you know, tearing up people's homes and displacing people and whatnot because they figure out something's in the area, so we're going to have this whole group of people just displaced, and oh, there's fragments in these old houses, and we're going to put all these fragments together, so all these people lose their homes because, you know, hundreds of years ago people took ruins of buildings and put them into a whole bunch of other buildings. And you know, I think that's going too far. And, you know, of course, the idea of the Temple Mount, some people want to close the whole thing off, except, you know, an outer court for certain people, and then a smaller court, and then the Holy Holies, basically just pile up a bunch of gold and jewels and kick everybody off instead of having millions of people visit the place every year.
Talking about Temple Mount, you mean the Dome of the Rock, or do you mean the Church of the Holy Sepulchre?
Well, I mean what they used to mean by Masjid al-Aqsa, and what they actually mean in the older sources. That, you know,
yeah. No, let me call you back. All right. Hey, dude, let me finish this. I got to call my wife back. All right. Jeffer.
Yeah.
We good? I got to call my wife back. She just called.
Okay. I'll let you go. I'll end with what I intended to end with, but I'll let you go. That's fine. We're good.
Yeah. No, if you got a question for me or anything, just.
Well, that was my question, and then I was gonna close because I gotta go.
No, go ahead and close, man. We're good. We're good.
Okay, so I've bestowed these before, so let's give Jason King here the dignity of his 9 vibrations. So that goes Qvh Prm ha 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 navat fuwa Qvh Prm mat ha 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 navat fuwa Qvh Prm ha 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 navat fuwa. So that is, in one sense, my name for you.
Thank you.
So I bid you adieu for at least for now, and if you want to come on again, we can arrange that.
Anytime, bro. Anytime, man. Yeah, I got to call the little Mrs.